They said the mail would never arrive. The road was gone. The horses had stopped. The storm had swallowed everything. But somewhere in the white silence of Montana, a 6-foot-tall black woman stepped down from a frozen stagecoach, lifted the mail onto her shoulder, and walked into a blizzard alone. Wolves watched her from the trees. Men twice her size had already turned back. The law said this job was for men. She didn't care. They would later call her Stagecoach Mary, the toughest mail carrier the American frontier ever knew. But before she became a legend of the Wild West, she was born without a birthday, owned by another human being, and erased from history before she ever had a chance to exist. This is the story they didn't teach you. The story of a woman who refused to disappear, and the road that tried and failed to break her. Stay with me, because this is where it truly begins. The sound of snow. Snow has a sound in Montana, not the sharp crack of ice beneath a careless boot, not the violent howl of a storm tearing through the mountains. This snow is quieter than that. It exhales, a long, endless sigh drawn from the white earth itself. So soft that if you are not alone, you might miss it. But tonight, there is no one else on the road. No voices, no lanterns, no tracks but one. A woman walks through it, her boots pressed down into the drift. Slow, deliberate, one step at a time. Each step sinks, then holds, as if the land itself is testing her weight, measuring her resolve. Over her shoulder hangs a canvas mail sack, swollen and heavy, its strap cutting into thick wool and muscle. Her breath clouds the air. She does not rush. She does not hesitate. Behind her, half buried in snow, the stagecoach leans at an awkward angle, one wheel frozen in place like an animal that finally collapsed after going too far. The horses were unhitched hours ago and led to shelter. The driver turned back before nightfall, but the mail stayed, and so did she. They will later say that this was madness, that no letter was worth a human life, that no road was passable in weather like this, that no woman, especially not a black woman, had any business out here alone. But none of that matters now. All that exists is the road ahead, barely visible beneath the snow, and the sound of her boots breaking the silence, somewhere beyond the line of trees. Wolves move. She does not see them, not yet, but she feels them, a presence at the edge of vision, a stillness that is not empty. Yellow eyes blink open and closed between the dark trunks of pine, watching this lone figure move through their world. They do not approach, whether it is caution, curiosity, or something closer to recognition. No one can say. The woman walks as though she belongs here, as though the storm itself must make room for her. The wind cuts harder now, biting at her face, creeping into the seams of her coat. Ice gathers at the brim of her hat. Her hands ache, fingers stiff around the strap of the sack. Still, she walks. Inside the canvas bag are letters written weeks ago, words of love, of grief, of business unfinished, promises folded into paper and sealed with hope. People waiting in small towns that have learned to measure time by arrivals and absences. She knows this. She has always known what it means to wait, far ahead. The road bends toward a cluster of lights, Cascade, Montana, a town that does not yet know it is about to be remembered, A town that will one day speak her name with something between pride and disbelief. But for now, she is just a figure moving through white emptiness, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in layers darkened by frost. A silhouette carved out of wind and snow. Her name is Mary Fields. To the men who hire her, she is a contractor. To the law, an inconvenience. To the wolves, a mystery. To history, she will become something else entirely. They will call her Stagecoach Mary. They will tell stories about nights like this, how she walked when wagons failed, how she carried the mail on her back through blizzards, how nothing short of death ever stopped her. Some of those stories will be true, some will grow larger with time. But what no story can fully explain is this moment, this silence, this sound of snow breathing beneath her feet. Because long before Mary Fields became a legend of the American frontier, she learned something that night after night would carry her forward. That the world does not yield to strength alone. It yields to those who refuse to turn back. And this road, this frozen, merciless road, has no idea who it is testing. The name people whispered. By morning, the town would talk. They always did. Cascade. Montana was not large enough to keep secrets for long, and the frontier had a habit of turning survival into story. When the storm finally loosened its grip, and the sky cracked open into pale winter light, men stepped out of doorways and scanned the road. Some expected to see nothing. Some expected to find a body. Instead, they heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, steady. A figure emerged from the white haze at the edge of town, carrying a canvas sack darkened by snowmelt. Her coat was stiff with ice. Frost clung to her eyelashes. Her breath came in deep, controlled bursts. She did not look triumphant. She did not look afraid. She looked finished with the road. Someone muttered, "That's her." Another man shook his head slowly, as if denying what his eyes confirmed. "She shouldn't have made it." Mary Fields crossed the last stretch of frozen ground and stopped in front of the post office, without ceremony. She lowered the mail sack to the porch. The thud echoed louder than it should have in the quiet morning. "Mail's here," she said. Her voice was low, calm, unremarkable, and yet people remembered it. Later, they would argue about details, about whether she smiled, about whether wolves followed her into town, about whether her coat was torn or her hands were bleeding. But everyone agreed on one thing. She had walked out of a storm that had turned men back. By noon, the story had grown. By nightfall, it had sharpened its edges. Someone swore she carried a rifle across her back. Another said she fired shots into the trees to scare off wolves. A drunk in the saloon claimed he once saw her knock a man unconscious with a single punch. Mary Fields did not correct them. She rarely corrected anyone. Stories, she understood, belonged to the people who needed them, and Cascade needed something to believe in. The frontier was unforgiving. Roads vanished. Promises broke. Winters erased lives without apology. In places like this, reliability was worth more than bravery, and endurance mattered more than charm. Mary had both. Children began to watch for her arrival. They counted days, not by calendars, but by whether the mail came. Old men leaned against storefronts and nodded when she passed. Even those who distrusted her because of her size, her skin, her refusal to behave as expected, learned to make room. She did the job, and in the American West, that was everything. The name came slowly at first. Stagecoach Mary. spoken half as a joke, half as a challenge. She did not invent it. She did not claim it. It followed her the way dust followed boots, the way frost followed nightfall. But the woman behind the name was not born on a road. She was not shaped by snow or horses or the rhythm of wheels. Long before Montana, before Cascade, before the sound of wolves in the trees, Mary Fields learned what it meant to carry weight alone. Not male, life. If you had met her then, in those early years, you would not have seen a legend. You would not have seen a frontier icon or a woman destined for folklore. You would have seen a tall black girl standing in a field of cotton under a Tennessee sun. No papers, no record, no future promised. History did not plan to keep her name. Plantation books rarely did. And yet, it survived. Somehow, Mary Fields was born around 1832 in Hickman County, Tennessee, though even that is an approximation. Like most people born into slavery, her exact beginnings were swallowed by silence. No birth certificate, no written memory. Only a name passed from mouth to mouth, strong enough to endure. Her world then was small. Fences, fields, commands barked and obeyed. Days measured not by dates, but by exhaustion. She worked early. She worked hard. The sun marked time better than any clock. The rhythm of labor carved itself into her body, broad shoulders, powerful arms, a frame built to endure rather than to please. They said she grew fast, that by her late teens she stood taller than most men around her, that her laugh, when it came, carried across the fields like thunder. Laughter was dangerous in those places. So was dreaming. But every soul, no matter how constrained, carries a quiet rebellion, a wondering, a refusal that has no words yet. Mary Fields wondered. She wondered what lay beyond the fences, beyond the road that disappeared into trees, beyond the rules written for her body but never for her spirit. She did not yet know the shape her life would take. She only knew this: she would not vanish quietly. And the snow that breathed beneath her boots in Montana, decades later, had no idea it was listening to someone history had already failed to erase. A name that refused to vanish. History did not expect her to survive. It certainly did not expect her to be remembered. On the plantation where Mary Fields spent her earliest years, people disappeared all the time, not in dramatic ways, not with funerals or gravestones. They disappeared quietly, sold south, worked to death, or simply absorbed into the endless machinery of labor. Names vanished first. A child might be called something one season, something else the next. A name was a convenience, not an identity. In ledgers, human lives were reduced to numbers, values, tallies written in ink beside cotton yields and livestock counts. Yet somehow, Mary kept hers. No one knows exactly why. Perhaps someone whispered it often enough. Perhaps she herself insisted on it, correcting anyone who tried to replace it. Or perhaps the name simply fit her too well to be erased. Mary Fields. It sounded solid, grounded, like something meant to last. The land where she was born was heavy with heat and moisture. Hickman County, Tennessee, red soil, slow rivers, fields that shimmered pale under morning mist. Cotton stretched to the horizon, its white bursting open like wounds beneath the sun. The days began before light, hands in dirt, hands bleeding, hands never still. For those born enslaved, the world was narrow and repetitive, yet brutal in its unpredictability. One wrong look, one misplaced word, punishment came swiftly and without explanation. Silence became a survival skill. Mary learned it early. She learned when to lower her eyes, when to speak, when not to. But silence did not mean submission. Inside her, something watched, measured, waited. She grew taller each year, stronger. Her body changed faster than the rules surrounding it, and that made her dangerous in a way no one quite named. A tall black girl was not supposed to stand out, not supposed to draw attention. Mary did anyway. Work shaped her muscles, but hardship shaped her temperament. She learned endurance before she learned hope. Learned that pain could be survived if it was met head-on. Learned that fear lost some of its power once you accepted it would come regardless. There are no diaries from those years. No letters, no testimony in her own words, only traces. Later in life, people would describe her as blunt, direct, uninterested in politeness for its own sake. They would say she had no patience for excuses, no tolerance for weakness disguised as authority. Those qualities were not learned on the frontier. They were forged here, on land that did not belong to her, under rules designed to break spirits quietly. Time on a plantation moved strangely. Days dragged, years blurred, seasons repeated until they lost meaning. Yet beneath that sameness, change was gathering, unseen but inevitable. Whispers moved through the quarters at night, words like freedom, words spoken softly, like prayers or curses. Some talked about running, others talked about the North, about places where chains were illegal and names mattered again. Most talked only in fragments, afraid of finishing the thought aloud. Mary listened. She did not yet know what freedom would look like. She only knew what captivity felt like, and that was enough. When the Civil War finally arrived, it did not announce itself clearly. News traveled unevenly, distorted by fear and rumor. Battles were fought far away, but their echoes reached even the cotton fields. Men disappeared. Overseers grew nervous. The air itself seemed restless. And then, one day, the rules changed. In 1865, the war ended. Slavery, at least on paper, was over. Freedom arrived not as celebration, but as confusion. People woke up to a world that no longer owned them, yet offered no instructions for what came next. Fields still needed tending. Hunger did not vanish with emancipation. Choice, when it finally appeared, felt like standing at the edge of something vast and unmapped. Mary Fields was in her early 30s then. She stood at the boundary of a life that had already taken so much from her, and a future that promised nothing clearly. Some stayed, some left, some were paralyzed by the weight of deciding for themselves. Mary did not linger long. Behind her lay the certainty of pain she understood. Ahead of her stretched uncertainty, but also motion. And motion, she would learn, was its own kind of freedom, decades later. As she walked through a Montana blizzard with mail slung over her shoulder, she would not think about Tennessee, not consciously, but the strength in her stride, the refusal to stop, the quiet certainty that turning back was never an option. Those were born there, in the fields, in the silence, in the decision, made long before the snow, that she would not disappear. The frontier did not make Mary Fields. It merely gave her room to be seen, and as the sound of snow breathed beneath her boots, history, slow and reluctant, finally began to listen. The day the world opened. Freedom did not arrive with trumpets. It came quietly, unevenly, like weather changing across a wide land in some places, The news traveled fast. In others, it moved slowly, distorted by fear, rumor, and those who had reasons to delay it. When word finally reached Hickman County, it did not sound like victory. It sounded like uncertainty. People gathered in small knots, whispering the same question over and over, as if repeating it might shape an answer. What now? For years, decades, the rules had been cruel, but clear. Work when told. Go where ordered. Endure. Survive. The future was decided by others, and in that certainty there was, strangely, a kind of grim stability. Now the rules were gone. Mary Fields stood among others who looked just as lost as she felt. The fields were the same. The sun burned just as hot. Hunger still gnawed. But something invisible had shifted, and the ground beneath their feet felt unfamiliar. Freedom, she would later understand, is not a gift. It is a question. Mary was in her early 30s. Her body bore the marks of labor. Thick hands, a back shaped by work, muscles hardened by years without mercy. She had survived long enough to be free, but survival had taught her caution. She did not celebrate loudly. She watched. Some people stayed. They had families nearby, or nowhere else to go. Others became sharecroppers, trading one form of dependence for another. Bound by contracts they could not read and debts they could not escape. Mary felt the pull of the road instead. The past lay behind her, known and suffocating. Ahead was risk, but also motion. And motion had always meant possibility. She packed little. What could she carry that was not already etched into her body? At dawn one morning, she walked away from the land that had defined her against her will. No ceremony, no witnesses worth remembering. Just a tall woman stepping onto a road that led beyond the fences. She did not look back. The road led south first, then west, bending toward water, toward the Mississippi River, a living artery of the nation, restless and wide, carrying goods, people, stories, and escape. When Mary first saw it, the river stunned her. It moved without permission, brown and endless, stretching beyond the horizon, indifferent to borders and ownership. Paddle boats churned its surface, their great wheels beating the water into motion. Smoke rose from their stacks, mixing with mist in the early light. For a woman who had known confinement, the sound of moving water felt like promise. She found work where she could, on riverboats that needed strong hands and stronger backs. Cook, washer, servant, laborer. The titles mattered less than the rhythm of motion. The river taught her quickly. It taught her to read men by how they spoke to those below them. It taught her to stay alert in ports crowded with gamblers, soldiers, drifters, and opportunists still raw from war. It taught her that freedom did not mean safety. A black woman traveling alone in the 1860s carried danger with every mile. Mary learned to meet it head on. She learned to stand her ground, to let her sighs speak before her words, to cultivate a reputation that discouraged foolishness. Some men feared her. Others respected her. Most learned not to test her patience. She preferred it that way, at night. She slept where she could, below decks, in cramped quarters smelling of coal, sweat, and river mud. The boat rocked gently beneath her, the constant churn of water a steady pulse. She lay awake sometimes, listening. The river did not stop. Neither did she. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into years. Towns passed by like brief thoughts, names remembered only until the next bend in the river. She belonged nowhere, and yet she was not lost. Motion had become her anchor. Freedom, she discovered, was not about comfort. It was about choice, about waking each day and deciding where to place your strength. Still, even the river could not carry her forever. There are gaps in the record here, years that slip through history's fingers. We know she worked. We know she moved. We know she survived. And then, eventually, the current shifted. Mary found herself in Florida, in the household of Judge Edwin Dunn. It was a quieter life, more ordered, heavy with expectations. She cared for the children, managed the work no one else wanted, brought with her the same blunt efficiency she carried everywhere. When Judge Dunn's wife, Josephine, fell ill, the house changed. The laughter faded, curtains stayed drawn. The smell of medicine replaced the scent of food. Mary tended to her as she had tended everything, without complaint, without sentimentality, with relentless care. She could not save her. When Josephine Dunn died, the judge faced a decision no law book could guide. His children needed to be taken north, to Ohio, to their aunt, Mother Amadeus Dunn, head of a convent. It was Mary he trusted with that task, not because she was gentle, but because she would not fail. And so, once again, the road opened. Mary Fields gathered the children, tightened her grip on responsibility, and stepped onto a journey that would change the shape of her life forever. The river had taught her how to move. The road was about to teach her who she was becoming. The weight of trust. The judge did not ask lightly. Trust, in those years after the war, was a fragile thing, rare, easily broken, and almost never extended across lines of race and status. Yet Edwin Dunn placed his children in Mary Fields' care without hesitation. It was not sentiment, it was judgment. Mary prepared for the journey the way she prepared for everything else, quietly, efficiently, without ceremony. She packed what the children would need: clothes folded tight, food wrapped carefully, a few small objects they refused to leave behind, tucked into pockets like talismans. There were no reassurances. Mary did not promise that the road would be easy. She did not promise comfort. She promised only this: they would arrive. The journey north cut through a country still bruised by war, towns half rebuilt, chimneys standing alone where houses had burned, men in faded uniforms lingering without purpose, their anger and grief never far from the surface. Trains rattled through forests stripped raw. Wagons creaked over roads chewed to mud. Nights were spent in stations that smelled of smoke, damp wool, and exhaustion. The children watched everything. They watched strangers' hands, listened to raised voices, flinched at sudden movements. Fear traveled faster than the train, and Mary felt it in their silence. She kept herself steady for them. She walked at the front, chose where they sat, decided when they rested, when to speak, when not to. Her presence was not gentle, but it was solid, and solidity mattered more than softness. When men stared too long, she stared back. When questions grew intrusive, her answers grew brief. They learned quickly. Mary Fields was not a woman to be negotiated with. At night, when the children slept curled together, she sat awake, her back against a wall, listening. She had learned long ago that danger often arrived quietly. She trusted her instincts more than rules or appearances, and her instincts did not fail her. They reached Ohio intact. The convent rose from the landscape like something out of a different world. Clean lines, ordered paths, bells ringing through air that smelled of frost and incense rather than sweat and coal. The sisters received the children with relief, with gratitude, with a gentleness that felt almost unreal after the road. Mary stood among them, towering, travel-worn, her coat stained and her hands rough, an outsider in every visible way. Someone asked about the journey. She answered honestly. "It was fine," she said. Then, after a pause, added, "But I could use a cigar and a drink." Silence followed. The nuns exchanged glances. Hands froze mid-motion. Somewhere a bell stopped ringing. Mary did not apologize. She never had. It was Mother Amadeus Dunn who broke the moment, the children's aunt, the woman who would shape the next chapter of Mary's life in ways neither of them could yet imagine. She studied Mary with eyes trained to see beyond appearances, to read people not by manners, but by actions. What she saw was not defiance for its own sake, but survival sharpened into habit. Recognition passed between them, not agreement, not similarity. Recognition. Mary had done what she promised. She had delivered what was entrusted to her, through a country still coming apart at the seams. That mattered more than tone or decorum. The convent offered Mary work, perhaps out of gratitude, perhaps curiosity, perhaps necessity. Strong hands were always needed. Mary accepted. She did not plan to stay long. She rarely did. But life, she would learn, does not always ask permission before it roots you somewhere. Ohio brought a different kind of confinement, order, silence. Bells that marked time with precision, meals taken at fixed hours, voices lowered, movements measured. Mary clashed with it immediately. She worked hard, harder than anyone else, but she did not soften. She spoke plainly, laughed loudly, smoked when she thought no one was watching, dressed for work, not for approval. The sisters whispered. Some were unsettled by her presence, others quietly relieved. The grounds flourished under her care. Paths cleared, fences mended, wood chopped and stacked before anyone asked. Mother Amadeus watched and said nothing. For 15 years. Mary Fields would live among those women, a storm in a still place, a contradiction that refused to resolve itself. But that was still ahead, for now. Mary stood at the threshold of something unfamiliar, a place that did not own her, yet expected her to fit. She did not. She never would, and the road that had brought her there had not finished with her yet. Staying without belonging. Mary Fields had never been good at standing still. Movement had always saved her. Roads, rivers, work that carried her forward before the past could reach too far into her chest. So, when the days at the convent in Ohio began to stack neatly on top of one another, she felt something unfamiliar pressing in. Stillness. The convent ran on order. Bells marked the hours. Prayers shaped the day. Silence was not emptiness here. It was discipline, a structure meant to hold people upright. Mary did not bend easily to structures. She rose before dawn, often before the first bell, and went straight to work. Wood needed splitting, gardens needed turning, fences leaned where they should stand straight. She worked until her breath steamed and her hands burned, then worked some more. The sisters noticed. They noticed the results before they noticed the noise. Paths that had been choked with weeds were cleared. Tools repaired themselves. It seemed things that had long been put off were suddenly done without discussion. The convent functioned better with her there, and yet her presence unsettled the peace it prized. Mary laughed too loud, spoke too directly, smelled of smoke and sweat instead of incense. She wore trousers when she worked outside. She swore when she hit her thumb. She did not soften her voice when addressing authority. These were small transgressions, but small things accumulate. Whispers moved through the corridors. Some sisters were afraid of her temper. Others were curious. A few admired her openly, though they would never say so aloud. Most simply did not know what to make of her. Mother Amadeus knew. She watched Mary the way a gardener watches weather, not trying to control it, but understanding its nature. She saw the contradictions clearly. A woman shaped by brutality, capable of gentleness without sentiment, rough in manner, precise in loyalty. When complaints arose, the Mother Superior listened patiently and then set them aside. "She works," she said, "and she stays." Mary did stay, not because she was comfortable, not because she belonged, but because, for the first time, no one was trying to own her labor. No one dictated where she slept or when she ate beyond the simple rhythms of the place. That was enough. Over time, a strange equilibrium formed. Mary pushed against the convent's boundaries. The convent pushed back, gently but persistently, between them. Something held. She argued over trivial things, how to plant tomatoes, how much feed the chickens needed. When rest was earned, her temper flared quickly, but it burned out just as fast. She might bark one moment and share her last piece of bread the next. In her contradictions, she felt more alive than she ever had. At night, in the small room they gave her, a narrow bed, a window overlooking the orchard, she sat alone with her thoughts. Sometimes she prayed. Not the way the sisters did, not with words or rituals. She prayed with endurance, with gratitude for another day survived, for hands still strong enough to work, for a place that did not demand she disappear. Seasons turned. Summer brought heat and the smell of earth. Winter froze the garden solid, and Mary chopped wood until her hands cracked and bled. When the first snow fell each year, it was Mary who broke the ice in the water barrels, who hauled firewood inside before anyone asked. The convent grew used to her. Visitors did not. People passing through would stop at the gate to stare. The tall black woman swinging an axe with practiced ease, her sleeves rolled up, her movements efficient and unashamed. They whispered questions, some with admiration, some with suspicion. Mary ignored them all, in the evenings. She sat near the kitchen door and smoked a cigar, watching the sky darken over the orchard. Eventually, Mother Amadeus would join her. They spoke little. Words were unnecessary. Both women had known loneliness, though in different forms. Between them grew an affection built not on similarity, but on recognition. Each understood the other's stubbornness. Each respected the cost of endurance, but equilibrium is fragile. The world beyond the convent walls still measured women by narrow rules, and black women by even narrower ones. Letters arrived, complaints followed. A bishop questioned whether Mary's presence was appropriate, her language, her clothing, her refusal to behave meekly. Mother Amadeus defended her again and again. But even patience bends under pressure. Mary heard the murmurs. She did not change. She had spent too many years reshaping herself for survival. She would not begin again now for comfort. 15 years passed this way, slow, layered, almost gentle in retrospect. A generation of younger sisters grew up knowing Mary's voice as part of the place. The sound of her laughter became familiar, even reassuring, and yet her soul remained restless. Sometimes she paused in her work and looked north, toward rail lines vanishing into distance. toward roads she had not yet walked. Motion still called to her. She did not know it yet. But Ohio was not her final stop. The road was waiting. And when it came, calling again, it would not be gentle. When the road called west. Illness arrived quietly. It always did. One morning, while Mary Fields was trimming the last of the bare rose bushes, she heard a cough behind her, dry, brittle, out of place in the still air. She turned and saw Mother Amadeus standing at the edge of the path, one hand pressed lightly to her chest. Her face looked thinner, paler. Mary noticed immediately. She had spent a lifetime reading bodies, knowing when strength was real and when it was being borrowed against tomorrow. Whatever Mother Amadeus was carrying now, it was heavier than fatigue. The convent moved into a different rhythm. Candles burned longer, voices softened. The smell of herbs and boiled water replaced that of bread and soil. Sisters took turns keeping watch through the night, listening to shallow breaths and whispered prayers. Mary did not pray aloud. She worked. She chopped more wood than usual, hauled water without complaint, stayed close, always within earshot, when asked to rest. She shook her head. "She'll need me," she said simply. The diagnosis, when it came, was uncertain. Pneumonia, perhaps exhaustion. Years of responsibility pressing inward all at once. The doctors spoke carefully, hedging every sentence. What they agreed on was this: the Ohio winters were no longer safe for her. The decision came from higher authority. Mother Amadeus was to be sent west, to the Montana Territory, where the air was drier, the climate harsher but less damp, and where a small Ursuline mission near the settlement of Cascade needed guidance. The news spread through the convent like a slow wind. Some wept, others tried to be brave. For Mother Amadeus. The decision was accepted with quiet resolve. She had never been a woman who confused comfort with calling. Mary said nothing. But that night, she did not sleep. She sat by the window in her small room, staring out at the orchard stripped bare by winter. Snow fell lightly, covering paths she knew by heart. 15 years of routine lay behind her. Stability, shelter, a place where she had been tolerated, even defended. And yet, she felt it immediately. Stillness was ending. The road was opening again. No one asked Mary to go. There were younger sisters, stronger men, funds that could be gathered, logistics to be arranged. Mary packed anyway. At dawn, she folded her few belongings into a worn bag. She tightened her boots. She did not explain herself to anyone who did not already understand. Mother Amadeus did. They stood together near the carriage on the morning of departure. The air was cold, thin with breath and quiet. The sisters gathered at a distance, giving them space. "You don't have to do this," Mother Amadeus said gently. Mary met her eyes. "I know." There was no drama in her voice, no declaration, just fact. The journey west was long. Trains carried them first, iron wheels cutting through farmland and forest, through towns that blurred together in soot and motion. At night, Mary sat by the window of the passenger car, her reflection faint in the glass, watching the country unfold. The land grew wider, flatter. Then suddenly, it rose. Plains gave way to ridges. Trees thinned. The air sharpened. The sky expanded until it felt almost too large to hold. At the final rail stop, they disembarked into a different world. Montana in the mid-1880s was unfinished, raw, vast. Horses stamped in the cold. Wagons creaked under loads meant for places barely built. Men spoke loudly, as if volume could impose order on distance. Mary adjusted her grip on the bags and stepped down. This was not Ohio. The final stretch to the mission near Cascade was taken on foot and by wagon. The road, if it could be called that, wound through open land, crossing frozen creeks and uneven ground that offered no forgiveness. The wind pressed against them like an argument. Mary walked beside the wagon when the terrain grew too rough. She carried what needed carrying, lifted what needed lifting. The mountains loomed ahead, indifferent and ancient, at night. The stars appeared sharper than any she had ever seen. They glittered in silence, vast and unblinking, as if the sky itself were newly made, after days of travel. The mission came into view, a modest cluster of wooden buildings perched above a frozen river. Smoke curled weakly from chimneys. A bell hung silent in the cold. Mary paused at the foot of the hill. This place was harsher than anything she had known. And yet, something in her settled. They were greeted with relief, with gratitude. Mother Amadeus was taken inside, wrapped in blankets, tended carefully. Mary followed, her coat stiff with frost, her face weathered and unremarkable to those who did not yet know what they were seeing. That night, she sat by the fire, listening to the wind tear across the plains. She understood something then, without naming it. Ohio had been a holding place. This was a beginning. The West did not care who you had been. It only cared what you could endure. And Mary Fields had been preparing for this land her entire life. Mother Amadeus did not recover quickly. The journey had taken what little strength she had left, and the Montana winter showed no mercy. The cold seeped into the mission walls, into the bones, into breath itself, each night. The wind howled across the plains as if testing the will of everyone inside. Mary Fields did not leave her side. She slept in short stretches, waking at the slightest change in breathing. She fed the fire through the night, her hands blistered and raw. She brewed broth, carried water from the frozen river, and learned quickly which herbs eased pain and which did nothing at all. There was no panic in her movements, only resolve. The sisters watched her with a mixture of gratitude and quiet awe. Mary did not speak of faith, but she worked as if belief lived in her hands. When exhaustion threatened to pull her under, she leaned on habit. When doubt crept in, she shut it out with action. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Mother Amadeus began to turn the corner. Color returned to her face. Breaths grew deeper. One morning, she asked for the window to be opened, just a crack, to smell the cold air. Mary complied without comment, though relief loosened something tight in her chest. "You stayed," Mother Amadeus said softly. Mary shrugged. "You weren't done." It was not kindness that kept her there. It was loyalty. As the worst of the illness passed, the mission revealed itself in full. Roofs leaked. Paths were barely passable. Supplies ran low. The river froze solid, cutting off easy access to water. Mary stepped into the gaps without being asked. She hauled timber from nearby stands, mixed mortar with her own hands, repaired walls that leaned too far toward collapse. When wagons arrived with supplies, she unloaded them alone, ignoring the stares of men unaccustomed to seeing a woman, especially a black woman, take on such work without hesitation. The mission began to change. It grew sturdier, quieter, more certain of its own survival. Men passing through town stopped to watch. They commented in low voices. Some laughed, Others frowned. None offered help. Mary did not look up. She did not need witnesses. Evenings brought a different rhythm, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky copper and violet. Mary and Mother Amadeus sat outside when the weather allowed. They watched the land darken, the plains stretching endlessly in every direction. "Do you think this place will ever feel like home?" Mother Amadeus asked once. Mary considered the question. "I don't think it's supposed to," she said. "I think it's supposed to make you honest." The West was not gentle, but it was clear. There were no hidden rules here, no polite masks. Survival was visible, so was effort. Mary understood that. Winter deepened. Snow piled high against the mission doors. Weeks passed without visitors. The world narrowed to wind, fire, and work. Mary's hands cracked and bled. Her shoulders ached. Still, she rose before dawn and went out into the cold. Isolation did not frighten her. She had known worse. But the mission could not escape scrutiny forever. Cascade was small, and difference traveled fast. People talked about the tall black woman who swore, smoked, and wore men's boots while working like 3 laborers combined. Some admired her. Others resented her. Authority, distant and uneasy, listened. Complaints reached the bishop, whispers of her temper, of her language, of her refusal to act as a woman should. The church preferred its order undisturbed. Mother Amadeus defended her. "She keeps this place standing," she said. "Without her, there is no mission." For a time. That was enough. Mary knew none of this yet. Or perhaps she sensed it and chose not to care. She had never lived by approval. She lived by necessity. And this place needed her. Spring crept in slowly, reluctant after such a winter. Snow melted into mud. The river cracked open, roaring back to life. Children arrived from nearby valleys to learn letters and hymns. The mission breathed again. Mary's work was everywhere, in the roof that no longer leaked, in the garden that finally held green, in the paths cleared of stone and ice. She had brought order to the wilderness, though she herself had never belonged to order, and that contradiction could not last forever. One morning, while carrying a load of timber, Mary felt her hands tremble unexpectedly. She paused, breathing hard, the mountains glinting white under fresh snow. The hammer slipped from her grip and fell into the drift with a dull sound. She stared at it for a long moment. Not fear, recognition. Change was coming again. The West never allowed stillness for long, and Mary Fields, whether she wished it or not, was already moving toward her next road. The trouble did not announce itself loudly. It began the way most endings do, small, ordinary, easy to dismiss, a disagreement over tools, a sharp word spoken too quickly, a man who felt his authority challenged simply by her presence. The mission employed a janitor, a man whose pride outweighed his usefulness. He watched Mary Fields move through the grounds with the quiet dominance of someone who did not ask permission to exist. He resented the way others deferred to her judgment, the way her work spoke louder than his position. One morning, as Mary stacked lumber near the chapel, he said something he would later wish he had swallowed. No one remembers the exact words, only the sudden stillness that followed. Mary turned slowly. Her face held no surprise, no anger yet, just attention, focused, heavy, unmistakable, the kind that makes men realize too late that they have misjudged distance. Chairs scraped, boots shifted. Someone muttered a warning. The janitor's hand moved toward his coat. So did Mary's. For a breathless moment, the mission held its own breath. Two figures facing each other on stone worn smooth by prayer and work. The sound of the wind threading through the buildings, the faint creak of leather. Then it ended. No shots fired. No blood spilled. But the line had been crossed. Word traveled fast. By evening, it had reached the bishop, and the bishop did not care for nuance. The decision came swift and final, wrapped in polite language that left no room for appeal. Mary Fields was to leave the mission immediately. Her presence was deemed disruptive, inappropriate, a liability. 15 years of labor reduced to a sentence. No discussion, no defense. Mother Amadeus received the news in silence. She argued once, calmly, clearly. She listed the work Mary had done, the stability she had brought, the lives she had quite literally held together through winter and illness. It did not matter. Institutions protect order before people. That evening, the sun dipped low over the plains, painting the sky in soft copper and fading gold. Inside the chapel, the sisters gathered for vespers. Their voices rose in careful harmony, filling the space Mary had helped keep standing. Mary listened from the doorway. She did not enter. She stood there, hat in hand, her coat already packed, her bag resting at her feet. The hymn drifted over her like something belonging to another life. Mother Amadeus joined her outside. For a long moment, neither spoke. "I'm sorry," the older woman said at last. Mary shook her head. "No need." There was no bitterness in her voice, only acceptance. She had learned long ago not to waste energy on what could not be changed. "You'll be all right," Mother Amadeus said. Mary nodded once. "I've been all right before." They embraced briefly, awkward, restrained, as though both feared breaking the other. No promises were made. None were needed. Mary picked up her pack and turned away. The road leading down from the mission wound between pines heavy with snow. The moon rose pale and cold, casting long shadows across the ground. Each step away felt both lighter and heavier than the last. Loss and freedom often wear the same face. She walked into the dark without looking back. Cascade greeted her without ceremony. A boarding house offered a small, drafty room, thin walls, a narrow bed. It was enough. It was hers. Through the walls, she heard life continuing, babies crying, doors slamming, laughter spilling from the saloon down the road. Mary lay awake that first night, staring at the ceiling for the first time in years. She had nowhere she was expected to be in the morning. The thought unsettled her. Then she rose, pulled on her boots, and went out to find work. She took whatever came, washing clothes, mending fences, hauling supplies, cooking for men too tired to care what their meals tasted like. Her hands grew rougher, her back stiffer, her spirit lighter. No rules now. She laughed when she wanted, drank when she pleased, spoke as she saw fit. Cascade did not know what to make of her. Some avoided her. Others sought her out. Children followed her through town, wide-eyed, watching her lift loads twice their size or swing a hammer with effortless control. She winked at them, tossed them apples or bread when she could. "Grow strong," she told them, "and mind your business." They always remembered that. In the evenings, she sat near the edge of town and watched the mountains darken. The stars here felt closer, sharper, as if they had dropped lower just to look at her. She thought sometimes of the mission, of Mother Amadeus reading by lamplight, of bells ringing into ordered days. But she did not regret leaving. Stillness had never been her calling. The West did not ask her to fit. It asked her to endure. And as the seasons shifted and the town slowly grew around her, Mary Fields felt something familiar stirring again. The old pull of motion, of purpose, of a road that needed walking. She did not yet know how it would come, only that it would. The mission had closed its door behind her. The frontier was about to open another. Cascade did not welcome Mary Fields. It observed her. The town was still young then, half-built, half-imagined. Wooden storefronts leaned into the wind. The road was little more than a promise scratched into dirt and ice. People came to Cascade because they believed there was something ahead of them. Gold, land, distance from who they used to be. Mary arrived with none of that hope. She came with experience. The boarding house where she rented her room smelled of cold wood and old smoke. The mattress sagged in the middle. The walls were thin enough to hear every argument, every laugh, every whispered regret from the rooms beside her. It was perfect. It asked nothing of her. She woke early, as she always had, and went looking for work. Cascade had plenty of it. Work no one wanted. Work that paid little. Work that broke backs and rewarded persistence more than skill. Mary took it all. She hauled freight from wagons stuck axle-deep in mud. She mended fences shredded by winter winds. She washed clothes until her hands burned and the smell of soap clung to her skin. She cooked when asked, cleaned when needed, lifted when lifting was required. She did not negotiate wages. She simply worked. Men noticed first. They noticed because she made them unnecessary, because she carried loads they struggled with, because she did not wait to be told what to do. Some laughed at first, uneasy and loud. Others scowled. Mary did not look at them. Children noticed next. They watched from porches and doorways as the tall black woman moved through town with the calm assurance of someone who had survived worse than gossip. They followed her at a distance, whispering questions to one another. Was she dangerous? Was she a soldier? Was she stronger than their fathers? Mary pretended not to see them. Sometimes she tossed them an apple, sometimes a piece of bread. That was enough to make her unforgettable. Cascade was not kind, but it was practical. People learned quickly that Mary Fields did not miss a job, did not quit halfway through, did not complain. When something needed doing, and doing right, someone would say, "Get Mary." She became part of the town's machinery, not admired, not trusted, relied upon. Evenings brought the saloon. Mary did not drink often, but when she did, she drank without apology. She sat where she pleased, spoke when she had something to say, laughed deep and loud, a sound that cut through conversation like a blade. Men tested her once, only once. A hand lingered too long. A comment crossed a line. Mary stood slowly, looked the man in the eye, and shoved him hard enough to put him on the floor. No words, no drama. The room went quiet. No one challenged her again. Respect in places like Cascade was not requested. It was enforced. Still, the work wore on her, not the labor. She had known that her whole life, but the lack of purpose behind it. Days blurred together. Jobs ended. She moved on to the next. Freedom, she learned again, could be heavy when it had no direction. To fill the evenings, she rented a small plot of land near the edge of town and planted a garden. The soil was stubborn, rocky, slow to yield. Mary worked it patiently, the same way she had worked everything else. When the first green shoots appeared, she smiled to herself. "Still growing?" she said aloud, as if speaking to an old friend. The garden became a quiet refuge. Children came to watch. She showed them how to press seeds into soil, how to tell weeds from promise. "Don't rush it," she told them. "Nothing worth keeping grows fast." They remembered that. Summer came, brief and intense. Cascade grew louder. New faces arrived. The town stretched outward, uncertain of its own shape. Mary remained steady within it. She helped rebuild a collapsed barn, hauled supplies through sudden storms, appeared at doorsteps in the middle of the night with wood or flour, and disappeared before thanks could be given. When asked why, she shrugged. Because it needed doing. And yet, for all her usefulness, she remained alone. Some nights, she sat outside her room and stared at the mountains until they blurred into shadow. She thought of Mother Amadeus, of the convent bells, of a life that had almost been still, but the West did not allow longing to last. Opportunity arrived the way it always did here, unexpectedly, spoken casually over a drink, half dismissed as rumor. One evening, a traveler mentioned that the government was opening new postal routes across the territory. Star routes, they called them. Dangerous, isolated, poorly paid. Men laughed. No one wanted them. Mary did not. She listened. The road had been watching her, and now it was about to call her by name. The man mentioned it casually, the way people do when they don't expect anyone to listen. A new postal route, a government contract, miles of wilderness between towns barely marked on maps. He called it a fool's job. Mary Fields did not respond immediately. She sat at the edge of the saloon, her glass untouched, the noise of conversation rolling past her without landing. She listened with the kind of focus that came from long experience. Mail routes were not just work, they were responsibility. Letters meant connection, proof that someone still remembered you, that the world had not closed its doors entirely. She finished her drink, stood, and left without comment. The next morning, before the sun had fully lifted itself over the mountains, Mary walked to the post office. The clerk looked up, blinked, and then smiled uncertainly. He had heard of her. Everyone had. "You're here about the route?" he asked. Mary nodded. "That's right." He hesitated, looked past her, as if expecting someone else to step forward. "You know what it involves." "I know what work involves," she said. The application was simple. A name, a mark, a willingness to prove capability under scrutiny. The trial would be held in the spring, when the roads were at their worst, half thawed, half frozen, eager to swallow the careless. Mary signed. Word spread quickly. Men laughed openly this time, not nervous laughter, but confident dismissal. They spoke loudly, making sure she heard, said things about her size, her sex, her place. Mary did not argue. She prepared. The day of the trial arrived cold and bright. Horses stamped impatiently. Wagons stood in a rough line, each man confident in his own strength, curious about the tall woman among them. When the signal was given, Mary moved. She did not rush. She did not fumble. Straps were secured in practiced rhythm, buckles fastened, reins checked. Each movement followed the last without hesitation. By the time the others finished, Mary's team was ready. The horses leaned forward, eager. The wagon stood steady. Silence fell. No one argued the result. The contract was signed that afternoon. The pay was modest. The risk was not. The route would run from Cascade to surrounding settlements, through forests, across frozen creeks, over open plains where weather turned deadly without warning. Mary accepted without hesitation. That night, she sat alone by her small stove and stared into the fire. The logs crackled softly, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the wind moved through the trees with familiar insistence. She thought of Tennessee, of the river, of Ohio, of every road that had carried her to this moment. This one felt different. This one felt like belonging. The first run began before dawn. Mary adjusted her coat, checked the harness one last time, and climbed onto the stagecoach. The iron step rang beneath her boot, a sharp, certain sound that carried into the distance. Behind her, Cascade slept. Ahead lay miles of silence. The road took her through dark forests and open land where the sky pressed close. Some days were bright, the blue so sharp it hurt. Others disappeared into fog so thick the world ended 2 steps ahead. Mary learned the land quickly. She learned how snow packed differently beneath wheels, how wind announced itself before storms, how horses breathed when they were close to exhaustion. She spoke to them constantly, low and steady, guiding rather than commanding. The mail sacks sat beside her, heavier than their weight suggested. They carried hope, news, grief, waiting. She never forgot that. When storms rose suddenly, she stepped down and walked, the sack slung over her shoulder. When drifts swallowed the road, she pushed through. One step at a time, people began to wait for her. Children stood at fences, watching the horizon. Old men stepped outside when the hour grew late, trusting she would come. And she did, always. They began to call her Stagecoach Mary. At first, she ignored it. Then she accepted it the way she accepted everything else, without comment. Winter came hard that year. Snow piled high. Wolves followed at a distance, curious but cautious. The wind screamed like something alive. Mary did not stop. Once, when the coach could not move, she left the horses behind, strapped on snowshoes, and walked the final miles. When she arrived, red-faced and rimmed with ice, she dropped the mail at the postmaster's feet. "Mail's here," she said. That was enough. By spring, her name had spread beyond Cascade. Stories grew larger, some true, some not. Mary did not correct them. She was too busy working. The road had chosen her, and she had answered. Winter did not ease its grip. It tightened it. The snow came earlier that year, heavier, more determined. Drifts swallowed fences. Roads vanished overnight. The wind carved the land into shapes that shifted by the hour. Even the men who had lived in Montana their entire lives spoke of turning back. Mary Fields did not. Each morning began the same way, before light, before warmth. She rose, fed the horses, checked the harness with hands already stiff from cold. Her breath crystallized in the air. Ice gathered along the edges of leather and iron. The stagecoach creaked as it moved, wheels groaning in protest. Mary listened. She learned the sounds that meant danger and the ones that could be ignored. A hitch strained too tight. A horse breathing wrong. Snow that looked solid but wasn't. The road tried her in ways no man ever had. Some days the sky was so white it erased depth itself. No horizon, no landmarks. Only motion and instinct. She counted steps when she had to, measured distance by the ache in her shoulders. On those days, she stepped down and walked. The mail sack rode her shoulder like a second spine. Its weight pressed into muscle and memory. She leaned forward, letting momentum do what strength alone could not. Wolves followed sometimes, not in attack, in curiosity. She saw them at the edge of vision, dark shapes moving between trees, yellow eyes blinking once, then vanishing. She carried a rifle, kept it close, but rarely raised it. The wolves seemed to understand something the men did not. She was not prey. Stories began to harden around her. They said she never missed a delivery. They said she walked 20 miles through a blizzard without stopping. They said she fired her rifle into the night, and the wolves fled. Mary neither confirmed nor denied any of it. She delivered the mail. That was all that mattered. Towns along the route began to mark time by her arrival. When storms delayed everyone else, people waited anyway. Someone would say, "If Mary's out there, the mail will come." And it did. Once. A storm buried the pass so completely that the postmaster was certain no one could cross it. Night fell. The fire burned low. People shook their heads. Then there was a sound at the door. Boots. A single knock. Mary stood there, rimmed with frost, her coat stiff as bark, her face red and calm. She dropped the sack on the floor. "Mail's here," she said. No explanation, no apology. The room erupted. Laughter. Shouts. Hands clapping her on the back until she shrugged them off. Someone tried to buy her a drink. Someone else asked how she did it. Mary took the coffee, ignored the question. How was simple? You didn't stop. Bandits learned her name too. The mail carried money orders, supplies, things worth stealing. Men whispered about stopping her coach, about catching her alone on the road. None tried more than once. Mary kept a revolver at her hip and a rifle within reach. She knew how to use both. There were stories of a man who stepped into the road and found himself staring down a barrel. "You want the mail?" she'd said. "Come take it." He did not. Whether the story was true mattered less than the fact that people believed it. Winter was her favorite season. It stripped the world down to essentials. Movement, endurance, silence, the sound of snow beneath wheels, the jingle of harness bells, the steady breath of horses pushing forward against the cold. It reminded her who she was. Years passed like this, measured in miles and weather rather than dates. Horses aged out. New teams took their place. Mary's hair turned silver. Her joints stiffened. The road noticed, but it did not defeat her. Men offered to take the route from her. She laughed. "You'd best be faster than me," she said. None were, one evening, near the crest of a familiar hill. She paused and looked down at the valley below. Cascade lay wrapped in amber light. Smoke rose from chimneys. Children's voices drifted faintly upward. She rested her hands on the reins and allowed herself a moment. The road behind her was long. The road ahead was known. For a woman once denied even ownership of her own name. It was more than enough. She clicked her tongue softly. "All right, boys," she said. "Let's go home." The wheels turned. The coach rolled forward. And once again, the road lost. Time did not announce itself. It arrived the way it always had, quietly, steadily. Without asking whether Mary Fields was ready, the road remained the same. The mountains did not soften. Winters still came hard and early. The mail sack still waited at the post office, heavy with the lives of other people. But her body began to speak in ways it never had before. It was subtle at first. A stiffness in the hands that lingered longer in the mornings. A dull ache in her back that did not fade once she started moving. Breath that shortened slightly on climbs she had once taken without thought. Mary noticed. She did not comment. Pain, to her, was not a warning. It was information, something to be acknowledged and worked around. She adjusted her grip on the reins, took an extra moment with the harness, spoke more gently to the horses when the cold pressed harder than usual, if anyone asked. She shrugged. "Just weather," she said. But the years were not weather. They were accumulation. Every mile walked, every winter endured, every night slept with one ear open to danger. Her body carried it all, even if her will refused to slow. The people of Cascade began to see her differently, not weaker, quieter. She spoke less in the saloon, laughed less often, though when she did, it still rolled from her chest and filled the room. She chose her words with more care, as if she understood now that not every truth needed voicing. Children who once ran to meet her had grown tall. Some had families of their own. They brought their sons and daughters to the roadside and pointed. "That's Stagecoach Mary," they said. With reverence, the children stared. They always did. Mary acknowledged them with a nod, sometimes a smile. She had become something permanent in their world, like the mountains or the river. A presence so familiar it felt unbreakable. At night, she sat longer by the fire. The work was still there, but the urgency had shifted. She found herself thinking more often of things she had not thought about in years. Tennessee, the heat, the cotton fields shimmering under morning mist, the sound of the Mississippi turning its great wheel. Ohio. 2. The convent bells, the orchard at dusk. Mother Amadeus's voice, steady and patient, speaking of duty without ever demanding obedience. Letters came occasionally, written in careful hand, updates on the mission, new children, small victories, losses. Mary read them slowly, moving her lips without sound, then folded them and tucked them away. Distance had not loosened that bond. It had clarified it. There were evenings when she walked alone to the edge of town, where the land dropped toward the river. She stood there, hands in her pockets, listening to the water move beneath moonlight. The sound reminded her that motion did not always mean travel. Sometimes it meant continuity. Cascade had changed. 2. More buildings, more noise. Trains arrived more regularly. The town was becoming something solid. Mary had helped make it so. Though no one had ever written that down, she did not need them to, yet even legends grow tired. Some mornings, she lingered before mounting the coach, not because she was afraid, but because she was listening, to the way her joints protested, to the way the cold settled deeper than before. Men noticed, offered help, suggested, gently, that perhaps it was time to let someone else take the route. Mary smiled at them. "I've still got miles in me," she said, and she did. But she also understood something she had not before. That strength was not endless. It was borrowed, day by day, from the body that carried it. There came a winter night when she camped near a bend in the river. The horses tethered close, the fire low. The stars were sharp and numerous, scattered across the sky like something deliberately placed. She sat wrapped in a blanket, watching sparks drift upward and vanish. For the first time in many years, she allowed herself to rest without planning the next step. She thought of all the roads she had walked, not as escape, but as choice. She had not outrun her past. She had carried it with her until it grew lighter. The road had given her purpose, but purpose, she realized, did not always require motion. When dawn came, she rose slowly, joints stiff, breath steady. She fed the horses, packed the mail, and continued on. But something had shifted. The road was no longer the only thing that defined her, and in that realization lay the beginning of an ending. Not sudden, not tragic, but honest. The kind of ending earned mile by mile. When the road slowed. Mary Fields did not stop working. She changed how the work lived inside her. The road was still there, stretching outward in familiar curves, but it no longer demanded everything she had. Some mornings, she watched another driver take the reins, someone younger, faster, eager to prove himself. She stood nearby, arms crossed, offering advice only when asked. "Watch the creek after snowmelt," she said once. "It lies." They listened, not because she insisted, but because she had earned the right to be believed. Her days filled differently now, when she wasn't on the route. She took in laundry, scrubbed and boiled and hung it in the sharp Montana air. The smell of soap and starch became part of her rhythm. It was quieter work, slower, but it kept her hands busy and her thoughts grounded. Neighbors came by with baskets of clothes and stayed longer than necessary. They asked questions, not about the mail, but about life. Mary answered carefully. She had learned that words carried weight. 2. Children appeared often, drawn by her steadiness. She showed them how to mend tears, how to fold without rushing, how to wait for the wind to do its part when hanging clothes. "The world's not in a hurry," she told them. "You shouldn't be either." Parents watched from a distance, surprised at the gentleness in her voice. They had known her strength. This was something else. Evenings found her walking the edges of Cascade. Greeting people by name, she had become a fixture, a constant, not celebrated loudly, but relied upon quietly. When trouble came, and it always did, Mary was there. A barn roof collapsed under late snow. She helped rebuild it. A family ran short of food. She appeared with what she could spare. She never announced herself, never waited for thanks. Because it needed doing was still her only explanation. The saloon had changed, too. She still sat there sometimes, nursing a drink, listening more than speaking. Strangers still came, curious to see the woman they'd heard about. They asked foolish questions, wanted proof. Mary gave them a look that ended the conversation. "You believe what you need to," she said. "I've got work to do." Fame had found her, but it did not own her. Her body slowed, but her presence deepened. Where once she had been motion, now she was memory in the making. Children repeated her words long after she'd said them. Men adjusted their behavior when she entered a room. She had become something like a measure of effort, of honesty, of what it meant to endure without bitterness. Sometimes, alone in the quiet of evening, she felt the pull of the road again, not as command, but as echo. She did not resent it. Every journey ends differently. Letters from Mother Amadeus arrived less often now, but they still came. Updates were shorter, the handwriting shakier. Mary read them slowly, then sat for a long time afterward, staring into space. She knew what it meant. Time was moving for everyone. One afternoon, while walking past the post office, she paused and listened to the familiar sounds. Paper shuffled, stamps pressed, voices calling names for years. That building had been her beginning and her end. Now, it was simply part of the town, and so was she. Mary Fields had spent a lifetime proving she could keep moving. Now she was proving something harder, that stopping, when chosen, was not defeat. It was arrival. There are moments when a person realizes they are no longer becoming something new. They are becoming complete. Mary Fields did not mark that moment with ceremony. There was no single morning when she woke and declared the road finished with her. It revealed itself gradually, in the way she lingered longer over simple tasks, in the way silence felt less empty than it once had. She still worked, but she no longer measured her worth by distance traveled. The road had taught her how to endure, Staying was teaching her how to remain. Some days she walked with a slight limp. Some nights the cold settled deep in her bones and refused to leave. She accepted these things without complaint. Pain had never frightened her. What frightened her once, long ago, was invisibility. That fear no longer followed her, in cascade. Mary Fields was known, not as a novelty, not as a story, but as presence. When disputes arose, people sought her opinion. When storms threatened, they looked to her first, not because she held authority, but because she held experience. She spoke rarely, but when she did, people listened. She had learned that wisdom did not require volume. It required patience. On quiet afternoons, she sat outside her small home and watched the town move around her. Wagons passed, children ran, dogs slept in patches of sunlight. Life unfolded without urgency. For someone who had once lived entirely in motion, this was a revelation. She took in laundry. Yes, but she also took in stories. People talked to her in ways they never had before, about regrets, about fear, about roads not taken. Mary did not offer comfort easily. She offered honesty. Do what needs doing, she told them. The rest takes care of itself. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes it wasn't, but it was always true. At night, she often returned to the river. She stood there and listened, the water moving steadily, indifferent to age or memory. The same sound that had followed her since Mississippi days now felt like companionship rather than invitation. She no longer needed to chase it. She had carried enough. There were moments of loneliness. Yes, she missed Mother Amadeus deeply. Letters came less often now, and when they did, they carried a quiet finality. Mary read them carefully, folding each one with deliberate care. When the last letter arrived, she did not cry. She sat very still for a long time. Then she went outside and split wood until her arms burned. Grief, she had learned, did not need words. It needed space. As the years edged forward, Mary found herself offering something she had rarely given before: guidance. Young men asked her about work. Young women asked her about independence. Children asked her about strength. She answered all of them the same way. Be useful. Be honest. Don't wait for permission. They remembered that, long after she was gone. Those words would echo in places she never saw. Mary Fields had lived many lives within one body. Enslaved girl, river worker, caretaker, builder, outcast, mail carrier, legend. Now, she was something quieter, a witness. She had outlived expectation, outlasted systems designed to erase her. She had taken every label the world gave her and worn only the ones that fit. In the evenings, when the sun dipped behind the mountains and the air cooled just enough to remind her of winter's approach, she sat and watched shadows lengthen. She felt no urgency to move, no need to prove anything. The road would always be part of her. It lived in her posture, her gait, the way she assessed distance without thinking, but it no longer demanded obedience. She had given it enough, and in that stillness, earned, chosen, unafraid, Mary Fields understood something that had taken a lifetime to learn. Strength is not only the ability to keep going, it is also the courage to stop. Stand where you are and let the world come to you. The legend had been forged in motion. The woman had been completed in rest. By the time Mary Fields slowed for good, Cascade no longer felt young. Neither did she. The town had thickened around its own habits. Streets that were once mud now held their shape. Buildings stood straighter. Children who had once followed Mary through the dust now passed her with the distracted confidence of adults who believed the world was already theirs. Mary noticed these things without resentment. Change, she knew, was not loss. It was evidence of survival. Her days began later now, not because she slept longer, but because mornings required more patience. She stretched carefully before standing. Let her joints speak before asking them to move. Outside, the town stirred into its familiar noise. Doors opening, wagons rolling, voices calling out tasks. She listened. For years, those sounds had been a signal to move. Now, they were simply proof that the town was still breathing. People came to her house without knocking. They brought laundry, news, questions they didn't know how to ask anyone else. Mary accepted all of it with the same unceremonious calm. When a young man argued with his father and threatened to leave town, Mary told him to finish the fence he'd started first. "When you can complete a thing," she said, "then you can leave it." When a woman asked how to live without fear, Mary answered honestly, "You don't." She said, "You just stop letting it decide for you." These were not speeches. They were tools. Mary Fields had never believed in fixing people. She believed in giving them something solid to hold on to. Work, clarity, responsibility. The rest was theirs. Cascade leaned on her without realizing it had done so. When a storm threatened, people checked whether Mary had stocked wood. When the river swelled, they asked if she thought it would hold. When tempers flared, her presence alone was often enough to settle them. She did not enjoy the attention, but she accepted the role. Fame had once followed her as rumor and exaggeration. Now it lived as memory, quieter but more durable. People no longer asked if the stories were true. They simply assumed they were. Children listened to her with the seriousness of those being given something rare. They watched her hands, the way she folded paper, the way she measured distance without thinking. She taught them how to sharpen tools, how to wait out bad weather, how to tell when a promise was worth keeping. "Watch what people finish," she said. "That tells you who they are." Sometimes, when the day was clear and the mountains stood sharp against the sky, Mary walked to the edge of town and looked out over the road she had once traveled daily. The route was quieter now. New drivers carried the mail. New horses pulled the wagons. She felt no jealousy. The road had not been taken from her. It had been passed on. At night, she sat by her stove and let memory arrive uninvited. Tennessee came back sometimes. The heat, the cotton, the long silence. The river followed. Ohio after that. Bells, gardens, a woman with calm eyes who had seen her clearly when few others had. Montana, though, was always last. The wind, the snow, the wide, unforgiving honesty of it. She did not regret staying. She had not escaped her life. She had finished it. Mary Fields had once carried the mail so others could stay connected across impossible distances. Now, she carried something else, continuity, the quiet assurance that someone had been here before you, had survived what you feared, and had lived to sit still afterward. The town did not build a statue. They did not name streets. They simply remembered, and in places like Cascade. Memory was the truest monument. The body always tells the truth first, long before words fail, before memory slips. The body begins to negotiate. Movements take longer. Balance requires attention. Strength arrives, but only after being asked politely. Mary Fields listened. She had spent a lifetime commanding her body, pushing it through cold, pain, hunger, and fear. Now, she treated it differently. She rose carefully, sat when needed, let herself rest without guilt. It was not surrender, it was wisdom. Her hands, once calloused and unyielding, had softened slightly. The scars remained, maps of work done and survived, but the force behind them no longer surged automatically. She accepted this without complaint. People noticed. They tried to help. Mary allowed it when it was offered quietly. She refused it when it was given as pity. There was a difference, and she had always known how to recognize it. The town adjusted around her, the way it does around anyone who has been present long enough to matter. Someone brought wood without asking. Someone else fixed a loose step on her porch. Laundry baskets arrived lighter than before. Mary did not protest. She understood the language of care. What did not fade was her mind. If anything, it sharpened. She remembered things now with startling clarity. Faces long gone, roads long buried under snow and time, decisions made quickly that had shaped decades. Sometimes she told stories, not the ones people expected. She did not speak much about wolves or storms. She talked instead about waiting, about moments when turning back would have been easier, and how staying the course had required less strength than honesty. "The hardest part," she said once, "is knowing when you're done." People sat with that. Her home became a quiet center. People came not for spectacle, but for steadiness. She offered no false comfort. Only perspective earned the long way. Children sat on her steps and listened. They asked questions about the road, about danger, about how to be brave. Mary answered simply. "Do the thing in front of you," she said. "Then do the next." She moved less now, but when she did, it mattered. A walk to the river, a slow pass through town. Each appearance carried weight, not because she demanded it, but because she had never wasted attention. Evenings grew longer. The fire burned low. Shadows stretched across walls that had held her through many winters. She sat and listened to the wind, its voice familiar, almost gentle now. Sometimes she closed her eyes and let memory rise without resistance. She saw herself younger, taller, stronger, but not wiser. She smiled at that woman, not with nostalgia, but with gratitude. Without her, this quiet would not exist. One afternoon, as she rested near the window, she heard children laughing outside, their voices carried across the yard, bright and unburdened. She listened until the sound faded into distance. She did not feel sadness. She felt completion. Mary Fields had been many things, but she had never been unfinished. The body was softening. Yes, but the shape of her life was firm. Mary Fields knew she was nearing the edge. Not because anyone told her, not because fear whispered it. She knew the way she had always known things, through attention. Mornings arrived slower now, not heavier, just softer, as if the day itself were easing into her room. She sat longer before standing, let the silence settle before moving through it. Outside, Cascade continued as it always had, unaware that something was quietly concluding. Mary did not announce her decline. She had never announced beginnings either. Her appetite thinned, her steps shortened. Some days, the walk to the door felt like a journey. She did not complain. She adjusted. She had lived her entire life in adaptation. Visitors noticed the change, though they did not speak of it openly. They brought food she didn't ask for, sat longer than usual, found reasons to stay. Mary accepted their presence without sentiment. Company, she had learned, was best when it arrived without demand. She spoke less now, but when she did, people leaned in. Her words had always been spare. Now they were distilled. "You don't owe the world noise," she told a young woman once. "Just honesty." That stayed. There were nights when sleep came easily and nights when it didn't come at all. On the restless ones, Mary lay awake listening to the wind move across the plains. It no longer sounded like challenge. It sounded like conversation. She thought of the road, how it had once pulled at her with urgency, demanded motion or else. Now it visited her gently, in memory rather than command. She recalled the sound of wheels on packed snow, the way horses breathed in cold air, the weight of mail on her shoulder. She did not miss it. She had not abandoned the road. She had completed it. One evening, as the first snow of the season fell, Mary asked to be helped outside. She sat wrapped in a blanket, watching the flakes drift down, slow and deliberate. Each one landed without argument. She smiled. "Still beautiful," she said. It was the last thing she said aloud that anyone remembered clearly. In the days that followed, she drifted in and out of rest. People came quietly. One by one, they sat near her bed, held her hand, spoke softly. Unsure whether she could hear them, she could. She heard everything. She did not respond. She did not need to. When Mary Fields died in December of 1914, there was no panic in the town, only stillness. Cascade closed its doors that day. The school let out early. The saloon did not open. People gathered without instruction, standing in the cold, unsure what to do with their hands. Someone said, "She carried the mail through worse than this." Someone else nodded. At her funeral, the town came in full. Men who had once doubted her, women who had leaned on her strength, children who had grown up under her quiet guidance. They stood shoulder to shoulder, heads bowed, the wind pressing against their coats. There were no grand speeches, no attempt to make her into something she hadn't been. They told the truth. Mary Fields had done what needed doing. She had never asked permission, never demanded recognition, never turned back. They buried her with respect, with care, with the kind of silence reserved for those who have earned it. Years later, stories would grow, books would be written, her name would reappear in history. She would become a symbol, but that was not her legacy. Her legacy lived in smaller things, in the way people kept their word when it mattered, in the way children were taught to stand their ground, in the understanding that strength did not require permission or apology. Mary Fields had once walked alone through a Montana blizzard with the mail on her back because the road demanded it. In the end, she rested because she had answered enough roads, and the snow, soft and endless, finally stopped asking her to move. Legends rarely arrive fully formed. They begin as absences, after Mary Fields was buried. Cascade felt wrong for a while. Not louder, not emptier, just uneven, like a chair pulled from a familiar corner of the room. People still went about their days, but certain habits lingered without purpose. Someone paused before speaking. Someone waited for a nod that no longer came. Someone else caught themselves thinking, "We should ask Mary," and then remembered. The road still carried mail. The town still grew. Life continued, but something steady had slipped into memory. At first, people spoke of her carefully, as if loud words might disturb her rest. Stories were practical, restrained. She never missed a delivery. She worked harder than any man I knew. She didn't put up with nonsense. These were facts, not legends, but facts. When repeated, begin to gather weight. A year passed, then another. Newcomers arrived, men chasing work, families looking for land, children who had never seen the tall black woman who once moved through Cascade like a fixed point. They asked questions. Who's Mary Fields? Why do people still talk about her? The answers came differently now. Someone said she walked 20 miles through a blizzard without stopping. Someone else said wolves followed her for days. A bartender swore she once knocked out a man twice her size with a single punch. The truth bent slightly each time it was told. No one corrected it. That was how legend worked. Mary Fields had lived her life without explanation. Her memory followed suit, in towns beyond Cascade. Her name traveled faster than the details. Stagecoach Mary, the black woman mail carrier, the toughest woman on the frontier. Articles appeared in regional papers, short pieces, often inaccurate, sometimes mocking, sometimes admiring. They focused on spectacle, her size, her temper, her refusal to act ladylike. They missed the point entirely, but memory is not history. Memory keeps what it needs, for black communities moving west. Mary became proof that survival did not require erasure, that strength could be visible and unashamed, that a life could begin in bondage and still end in ownership of self. For women, she became contradiction made flesh. She did not fit the stories told about them. And yet she existed anyway, worked anyway, endured anyway. For Cascade, she remained simpler. She was Mary, the one who showed up years later, when the postal service modernized and stagecoaches disappeared. Older residents shook their heads at the new trucks and schedules. Mary would have hated that, someone said. Someone else laughed. Mary would have driven it through anything. They were probably right. As the 20th century advanced, America changed faster than memory could keep up. Wars came, industries rose, the frontier closed in name, if not in spirit. Mary Fields slipped further into the margins. She appeared occasionally in trivia columns, in brief mentions, in lists of unusual figures from the Old West. Often her story was shortened, simplified, sanitized. Sometimes it was exaggerated into caricature. Neither version honored her. The real Mary Fields lived between extremes. She was not invincible. She was not gentle. She was not defined by hardship alone. She was deliberate, and deliberation does not photograph well. It took nearly a century for historians to begin asking better questions, to look past headlines, to read between gaps, to understand that some lives leave fewer records not because they mattered less, but because the world was not prepared to notice them. When Mary's story resurfaced more fully, it surprised people, not because it was unbelievable, but because it was undeniable. She had existed. She had worked. She had mattered. The road she walked could be traced, the contracts verified, the testimonies collected. Her life, once nearly swallowed by silence, stood firm against forgetting. And yet, even then, something essential resisted capture. You could not footnote her resolve. You could not archive her presence. You could not fully explain why people trusted her. Those things lived outside documents. They lived in tone, in pauses, in the way a town remembered how to stand. Mary Fields did not become immortal by being perfect. She became enduring by being consistent. And long after the snow had covered her grave, long after the road had changed shape and name, the lesson she left behind remained simple and stubborn. Do the work, finish the road. Don't wait for permission to exist. That was the part of her story no legend could improve. History does not search for people like Mary Fields. It waits for someone else to stumble upon them. For decades. Her name drifted at the edges of textbooks and archives, a footnote here, a curiosity there. She appeared briefly, then vanished again beneath louder stories. Men with guns, men with land, men whose victories fit neatly into timelines. Mary did not fit. She had left no memoir, no speeches, no carefully shaped legacy. What she left instead were gaps. And gaps make historians uncomfortable. In the mid-20th century, as America began asking harder questions about who had been left out of its stories, those gaps started to matter. Scholars looked again at the frontier, not as myth, but as labor, as endurance, as ordinary people doing extraordinary work without applause. And there she was, a black woman listed in postal records, a contractor on a federal route. A name that appeared again and again where others faded. Stagecoach Mary. At first, researchers doubted it. The image clashed too sharply with expectations. A formerly enslaved woman, alone, armed, responsible for mail across hostile terrain. It sounded like folklore dressed up as fact, so they checked again. The records held. Contracts confirmed her roots. Census documents placed her in Cascade. Newspaper mentions, brief, sometimes dismissive, acknowledged her presence. Oral histories from Montana families spoke of her with a clarity that resisted embellishment. She was real. One historian wrote, and she was consistent. That word mattered. Consistency is harder to mythologize than heroics. It doesn't explode across a page. It accumulates quietly. Mile by mile, winter by winter, Mary Fields had been consistent. As civil rights movements reshaped American memory, her story took on new gravity. She was no longer an oddity. She was evidence. Evidence that Black lives had shaped the nation in ways history had refused to fully record. For Black women in particular. Her life struck a nerve. She had not asked permission to be strong. She had not softened herself to be acceptable. She had not waited for recognition before acting. She had lived. Documentaries followed. Children's books softened her edges. Academic papers tried to place her within frameworks that never quite fit. Each retelling captured something, but never everything. That was the trouble. Mary Fields resisted simplification. She was not inspirational in the tidy way America preferred. She did not overcome hardship to become polite or palatable. She did not trade strength for virtue. She remained herself. Modern audiences struggled with that. Was she a feminist icon? A labor hero? A frontier anomaly? A civil rights precursor? The answer, inconveniently, was yes, and also none of the above. She had not lived to symbolize anything. She had lived to finish the job. In classrooms, teachers began using her story differently, not as spectacle, but as correction, as a reminder that history's center was always crowded, and that the margins were often where the real work happened. Students asked the same question again and again. Why hadn't we heard of her before? The answer was never comfortable, because she didn't fit the story America wanted to tell about itself. She was too Black for the frontier myth, too independent for the women's narrative of the time, too ordinary in her motives to be romanticized easily. So she was set aside, until memory caught up with truth, in Montana. Recognition came late but sincere. Schools taught her story. Exhibits appeared. Her name was spoken aloud without apology or novelty. Not as Stagecoach Mary alone, but as Mary Fields, the woman who did the work. And as her story traveled outward again, this time carried by intention rather than rumor, it gained something it had never needed before. Context. People began to see her not as exception, but as example, not of greatness bestowed, but of dignity claimed. She did not wait for history to notice her. History had to learn how to see. Every legend begins where certainty ends. By the time Mary Fields returned to public memory, she was no longer just a person. She was an outline, broad, dramatic, easy to fill with whatever meaning the moment required. Strength became exaggeration. Silence became mystery. Endurance became invincibility. Stagecoach Mary. The name itself did half the work. Stories leaned into the extremes. She was described as fearless, tireless, unbreakable, a woman who laughed at danger, who never doubted, who never bent, a frontier giant carved from snow and iron. It was a good story. It was also incomplete. Because Mary Fields had been afraid. She had been tired. She had bent, many times. She had simply refused to stay bent. The myth flattened her into spectacle. But the truth revealed something harder to admire and more important to understand. She was deliberate. She chose persistence not because she enjoyed suffering, but because the alternative, disappearing quietly, was unacceptable. History prefers heroes who rise once and shine brightly. Mary Fields rose every day. That kind of strength is inconvenient. It does not climax neatly. It does not resolve itself in a single act. It accumulates slowly, without witnesses, without applause. That is why myth rushed in to replace it. People needed her to be larger than life because the reality that an ordinary woman, shaped by brutality and choice, could outwork systems designed to erase her, was unsettling. It raised uncomfortable questions. If she could do this, why hadn't others been allowed to? If she existed, who else had history overlooked? If strength looked like this, why had we been taught to look elsewhere? So the myth simplified her. It made her exceptional enough to be ignored again. But the real Mary Fields lived in the spaces between stories. She was blunt, yes, but also patient. She was tough, but also careful with children. She carried weapons, but preferred not to use them. She worked alone, but understood community deeply. She did not seek isolation. She accepted it when it was the cost of honesty. The myth painted her as defiant for defiance's sake. The woman was practical. She swore because politeness had never protected her. She wore men's clothes because they worked. She stood her ground because retreat had never been offered as a safe option. These were not statements. They were solutions. Modern retellings sometimes struggled with this. They wanted Mary to represent something clean, empowerment, resistance, triumph. They wanted her to fit comfortably into banners and slogans. She never had. Mary Fields was not symbolic in the way movements prefer. She did not perform her identity. She did not narrate her struggle. She did not frame her life as progress. She simply lived it. That made her dangerous to oversimplify. Because if her strength came not from destiny or exceptionalism, but from decision, then it became accessible, replicable, demanding. It asked something of the listener. And so the myth persisted, even as the truth reemerged alongside it. Two Marys began to coexist. The legend, a woman who never failed, who never slowed, who conquered the frontier. And the woman, someone who got up despite pain, who kept moving despite doubt, who stayed when leaving would have been easier. One inspired awe, the other offered instruction. And instruction is harder to consume than inspiration. Mary Fields had never wanted to be admired. Admiration did nothing to keep you warm, did nothing to feed you, did nothing to get the mail through a blizzard. What mattered was follow-through. Finish what you start. Show up when you say you will. Do not wait to be validated before acting. Those lessons survived long after the myth faded, in cascade. People remembered the woman more than the legend. They spoke of her habits, her expectations, the way she could silence a room without raising her voice. She didn't talk about being strong. Someone once said, "She just expected you to be." That was her true inheritance, not the stories told later, but the standards she left behind. Mary Fields did not become timeless by being extraordinary. She became timeless by being consistent in a world built on inconsistency. The myth made her larger than life. The truth made her useful. And in the end, it is the useful truths that last. Every story about roads eventually runs out of distance, not because the land ends, but because the traveler changes. By the time Mary Fields became a figure people argued about, myth or truth, symbol or anomaly, the road she had walked so faithfully no longer belonged to her body. It belonged to memory, to interpretation, to those who needed to believe that endurance always looked dramatic. Mary herself had known better. The last road she walked was quiet. It did not stretch across mountains or vanish into storms. It ran through kitchens and porches, through conversations held at dusk, through the careful passing on of habits that could not be written down. It was the road of aftermath, of what remains when motion is no longer required. In the years after her death, people tried to trace her steps with maps and dates. They measured miles, counted winters, cataloged storms. They wanted to know how far she had gone, as if distance itself explained anything. But distance had never been the point. Mary Fields had not walked to escape something behind her. She had walked toward responsibility again and again until responsibility no longer needed to move. The West had taught her that survival was not heroic. It was repetitive. You got up, you worked, you finished what you said you would. And when you could no longer do those things in the same way, you taught others how to do them better. That was the final road. It did not announce itself. It revealed itself in small moments. A child pausing before quitting. A man returning to finish a job he'd abandoned. A woman standing her ground without apology. None of them said Mary's name. They did not need to. Her influence had never required credit. In American culture, endings are expected to resolve, to uplift, to crown a life with meaning so clear it can be summarized. Mary Fields resisted that impulse even in memory. Her life did not resolve, it settled. And settling is harder to celebrate. There is no triumph in it, no music, no single image that captures its weight. There is only continuity, the quiet passing of standards from one set of hands to another. Mary had carried the mail so people could remain connected. In the end, she carried something else entirely: expectation. That work mattered, that excuses were optional, that strength could be unremarkable and still decisive. People who inherited that expectation did not call it legacy. They called it normal. That was her greatest disruption. Because normal, when reshaped, changes everything. The American frontier is often remembered as a place conquered by bold men and violent ambition. Mary Fields offered a different accounting, one that did not erase struggle, but refused to glorify it. She did not conquer the frontier. She cooperated with it. She listened to weather, to animals, to her own limits. She did not dominate the land. She learned how not to be destroyed by it. That, too, was instruction. The last road Mary Fields walked was not marked on any map. It ran through time, through the way history slowly corrected itself, through the recognition that greatness does not always announce itself, and that endurance, sustained, uncelebrated endurance, is often the truest form of agency available. By the time people began to ask what her story meant, the answer was already present in how it lingered, not as inspiration, as permission. Permission to be direct. Permission to be sufficient. Permission to exist without performance. Mary Fields had never asked the world to change for her. She had simply refused to disappear inside it, and that refusal passed quietly from life to memory, from memory to habit, became the final road she left behind, one that others could walk without needing to know her name. America no longer looks like the country Mary Fields walked through. The roads are paved. The mail moves invisibly, carried by machines and signals. Storms are tracked by satellites, named before they arrive. And yet, the question she lived inside remains unchanged. Who does the work when it is hard, thankless, and necessary in the modern telling of American strength? Speed is celebrated, disruption is praised, visibility is currency. The loudest voices are often mistaken for the strongest ones. Mary Fields would not have recognized that definition. She understood strength as something quieter, slower, repetitive. You showed up, you finished. You did not require an audience. In today's America, her life unsettles because it refuses easy translation. She cannot be reduced to productivity slogans or motivational posters. Her endurance was not optimized. It was sustained. She did not hustle. She did not brand herself. She did not leverage adversity into narrative advantage. She simply carried what needed carrying. That makes her story uncomfortable for a culture addicted to shortcuts. Mary Fields offers no illusion that life becomes easier if you do things right. She proves only that meaning accumulates when you do them anyway. Modern readers often ask what her lesson is. The wrong question. Mary Fields did not live to instruct. She lived to remain. What she offers is not advice, but orientation, toward responsibility over recognition, toward function over image, toward dignity earned daily rather than claimed once. In an era that celebrates resilience as aesthetic, hashtags, speeches, applause, Mary's endurance feels almost foreign. She did not rise once. She rose every day. And that distinction matters, because rising once can be coincidence. Rising daily is character. In workplaces, communities, families. Her kind of strength still exists, largely unnoticed. It looks like people who keep systems running without ever being named. It looks like women whose labor is expected, not applauded. It looks like those who absorb strain so others can move faster. Mary Fields belongs to them. She reminds us that history does not turn only on moments of change, but on those who stabilize chaos long enough for change to happen. The American West mythologized expansion as conquest. Mary lived it as maintenance. Roads were not conquered by her. They were kept open. That distinction reframes everything. To keep something open requires patience, attention, care. It requires accepting that your work may never be celebrated precisely because it succeeded. If Mary had failed, she would have been remembered sooner, because failure attracts witnesses. Success, especially quiet success, often erases itself. In this way, Mary Fields becomes not a relic of the past, but a mirror held up to the present. She asks, without asking, how many people are doing essential work right now whose names will never be spoken aloud, and whether that erasure is accidental or convenient. Her life also challenges the idea that dignity must be granted by institutions. She was expelled from places of order, ignored by official histories, marginalized by every system she encountered, and yet she lived with authority, not borrowed, not assigned, assumed. Authority rooted in competence does not require permission. That lesson is still radical. In communities where people wait to be validated before acting, Mary Fields offers an alternative. Act first. Finish well. Let reality respond. That does not guarantee justice, but it guarantees presence. Mary Fields did not change America. She revealed it. She revealed who is allowed to be remembered and who must insist on being seen through action alone. She revealed that endurance is not glamorous, but it is foundational. And she revealed that the quietest lives often carry the heaviest weight. As America continues to wrestle with its own narratives, who belongs, who matters, who gets to define strength, Mary's story does not offer closure. It offers pressure. Pressure to look again. Pressure to listen longer. Pressure to honor what does not shout. The road she walked no longer exists, but the work she embodied does. Every day, uncelebrated, unfinished, necessary. Every life that matters leaves a silence behind it. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of completion. The kind that settles after something has been done thoroughly, without excess, without spectacle. Mary Fields left that kind of silence, long after her name began to circulate again, long after articles and lectures tried to explain her significance. Something quieter remained untouched by interpretation. It lived in the pauses between sentences, in the way people spoke about work when no one was listening. There is a difference between being remembered and being felt. Mary Fields was felt, not as nostalgia, not as inspiration, but as expectation. Expectation that the road would be cleared, that the mail would arrive, that someone, somewhere, would do what needed doing even when it was inconvenient, unrecognized, or dangerous. That expectation did not announce itself. It simply existed in this way. Mary's life resisted closure. There was no final lesson to underline, no moral to extract cleanly. Any attempt to summarize her reduced her. Any attempt to elevate her turned her into something she had never been. She was not a moment. She was a process. And processes do not end. They slow. They shift. They change hands. The American tendency is to look for peaks, for moments of transformation so dramatic they eclipse everything before and after. Mary Fields offers something more unsettling, a life without peaks, only persistence. That makes her difficult to place in a culture addicted to climax. She does not fit into before and after narratives. Her life does not hinge on a single act of bravery or rebellion. It hinges on follow-through. What happens after the decision? What happens the next day? And the day after that? The silence she left behind is the silence of systems that no longer notice the person maintaining them. When something works consistently, attention moves elsewhere. Maintenance becomes invisible. Mary Fields understood that invisibility intimately. She had lived most of her life outside acknowledgement. She had learned early that survival did not guarantee recognition, and that recognition was often irrelevant to survival. The silence after her work was not neglect. It was evidence. Evidence that she had done her job well enough to disappear. In the final years of her life, Mary did not seek reflection. She did not speak of meaning or legacy. She lived as she always had, adjusting to what the day required, accepting what it offered, refusing what it demanded unnecessarily. That restraint carried into memory, her story, when told honestly. Leaves space for the listener to sit with discomfort, space to question what they expect from a life well lived, space to reconsider whose stories are elevated and why. Mary Fields does not resolve those questions. She holds them open. That openness is her final contribution. Because it resists consumption. You cannot turn her life into a slogan without breaking it. You cannot simplify her endurance without losing its weight. You cannot celebrate her without confronting the systems that made her exceptional by exclusion. So the story slows here. Not because there is nothing left to say, but because saying more would crowd out what matters. Mary Fields walked until walking was no longer required. Then she stood. Then she rested. What followed was not emptiness. It was continuity in the next generation and the one after that. People would unknowingly echo her standards. They would expect work to be finished. They would distrust excuses. They would value presence over performance. They would not know where those expectations came from. That is how endurance spreads. Quietly, indirectly, without attribution. The silence Mary Fields left behind is not the absence of her voice. It is the presence of her discipline. And that silence, steady, uncompromising, unromantic, is the threshold we stand on before the final chapters. Because the end of her story is not about what happened next, it is about what continues at some point. Every story stops asking what happened and starts asking what counted. Mary Fields' life resists that question, not because it lacks meaning, but because it refuses to arrange itself into proof. There is no single moment you can point to and say, there. That was the triumph. That was the turning point. That was when it all made sense. Her life does not add up that way. It adds up slowly, in fragments, in habits, in what remained standing after she was gone. When people ask whether Mary Fields lived a full life, they usually mean something else. They mean, was she happy? Was she recognized? Was she rewarded? Those questions assume that fulfillment is something granted at the end. Like a verdict. Mary Fields never waited for verdicts. She lived as though sufficiency was something practiced daily, not earned later. She did not chase satisfaction. She chased completion. Finish the route, deliver the mail, repair the fence, split the wood, say what needed saying, and then stop talking. This approach unsettles modern sensibilities. We are trained to believe that a life must ascend, that it should become more visible, more impactful, more extraordinary with time. Mary's life did the opposite. It moved from motion into stillness, from danger into presence, from road into community. Not decline, integration. She did not fade. She settled. That distinction matters because it reframes what it means for a life to be enough. Mary Fields did not leave behind wealth. She did not leave behind children who carried her name. She did not leave behind institutions that bore her likeness. She left behind standards. Standards are harder to measure than achievements, but they last longer, in cascade, after Mary was gone. People noticed small changes in themselves. They finished tasks they might once have abandoned. They spoke more plainly. They tolerated less nonsense, not out of aggression, but out of respect for time. No one said this came from her. It didn't need to. A complete life does not require attribution. It requires transmission. Mary's life transmitted a way of being in the world that did not rely on optimism. It did not promise reward. It did not even promise justice. It promised only this, that meaning could be built without permission. That promise is heavy. It places responsibility back where many would rather not look, on the individual, on the choice to act without guarantee. Mary Fields never had guarantees. Born without ownership of her own body, she learned early that waiting for fairness was a luxury. So she built her life around what could be done now, with the strength available today. That ethic followed her west, followed her into old age, followed her into memory. A complete life, in her example, is not one that resolves conflict. It is one that remains coherent. Her values did not change when conditions improved. Her standards did not soften when admiration arrived. She did not rewrite her past to fit a better ending. She accepted continuity. That acceptance, rare, unromantic, deeply demanding, is what gives her story its weight. In a culture that confuses intensity with depth, Mary Fields offers a quieter metric. Not how loudly a life is lived, but how steadily. Not how much it transforms the world, but how little it contradicts itself. By that measure, her life was not merely full, it was complete. There is no unused chapter in it, no part that exists only as prelude, no section that must be excused or explained away. She lived what she lived, she did what she said she would do, and when she could no longer do it, she taught others how to try. That is not a dramatic ending, it is a rare one, and it is enough. The idea of a life being enough makes many people uncomfortable. It feels incomplete, unambitious, almost suspicious. We are taught to believe that if something ends without applause, it must have ended too early. That if a life does not crescendo into recognition or reward, it has somehow failed to maximize itself. Mary Fields contradicts that belief so completely that her story often triggers resistance before reflection. Because she did not want more. She wanted alignment. Modern life is built on escalation, more visibility, more productivity, more self-definition. Even rest must be earned, justified, optimized. Mary Fields rested because the work was done. That distinction cuts deep. She did not ask whether she deserved peace. She asked whether she had finished what needed finishing. When the answer became yes, she stopped. For many people today, that logic feels unreachable. There is always more to do, more to prove, more to become. Mary's life suggests something almost heretical, that becoming is not infinite, and that endless striving can be a form of avoidance rather than growth. She did not chase meaning, she built it until it held. That stability, earned, not declared, is what unsettles modern readers most, because it implies that dissatisfaction is not always caused by circumstance, but sometimes by misalignment between effort and intention. Mary Fields worked brutally hard, but she did not fragment herself. Her labor served a clear purpose. Her strength had direction. Her values did not shift to accommodate approval. Contrast that with contemporary anxiety. Many people work harder than ever, yet feel perpetually behind. They move faster, but feel less grounded. They collect achievements without collecting coherence. Mary Fields offers no sympathy for that confusion. Not because she lacked compassion, but because she lacked illusion. She understood something we often resist, that a life cannot be optimized into fulfillment. It must be committed into it. Commitment narrows options. Mary chose the road, then chose the town, then chose stillness. Each choice closed doors, and that was the point. A life that remains open forever never becomes solid enough to rest inside. Mary's enough came from closure, not from abundance, but from completion. Modern culture treats closure as failure, as settling, as giving up potential. Mary treated it as responsibility. You close what you open. You finish what you start. You do not abandon a road simply because another looks shinier. That ethic feels almost radical now. It demands honesty about limits, about time, about the fact that bodies age and lives narrow whether we consent or not. Mary consented early. She did not romanticize youth. She did not cling to relevance. She did not reinvent herself endlessly to remain visible. She became reliable. And reliability, unlike novelty, ages well. Her life suggests that peace is not the absence of struggle, but the absence of internal contradiction. She did not fight herself. She did not argue with reality longer than necessary. When the road was hers, she walked it fully, when it wasn't. She let it go. That letting go is what terrifies us, because it asks, what if you stopped when you were done, not when you were exhausted? What if you didn't need the world to confirm your value before you rested? Mary Fields never waited for confirmation. She had measured her life by action, not reflection. And when reflection finally came, it did not accuse her. It affirmed her. A life being enough does not mean it was small. It means it was contained. Contained enough to be carried without resentment. Contained enough to be remembered without distortion. Contained enough to end without regret. That containment, rare, disciplined, deeply unfashionable, is Mary Fields' quiet challenge to the modern world. She does not ask us to live like her. She asks us to stop pretending that endless motion equals meaning. There comes a point in some lives when questions lose their urgency, not because they have been answered, but because they are no longer needed. Mary Fields reached that point without ceremony. She did not sit down one day and decide she understood everything. She simply stopped interrogating her own existence. The constant internal audit. Was this enough? Did this matter? Was I seen? Fell away as naturally as breath slows in rest. This is what most people misunderstand about acceptance. It is not resignation, it is resolution. Mary did not accept her life because it had been easy or fair. She accepted it because she had lived it without contradiction. She had not betrayed herself in pursuit of approval. She had not delayed her values until conditions improved. She had acted first. The modern instinct is to frame acceptance as a reward for success. You accept yourself after you have proven something, after you have achieved enough, accumulated enough, been validated enough. Mary Fields reversed that order. She accepted herself first, then did the work. That reversal is subtle, but it changes everything, because when acceptance comes first, effort becomes focused rather than frantic. Work becomes expression rather than justification. Rest becomes possible without guilt. Mary Fields did not live free of doubt. She lived free of negotiation. She did not bargain with her conscience. She did not trade parts of herself for smoother passage. When something needed doing, she did it. When it no longer did, she stopped. The questions modern people carry: am I enough? Did I do enough? Will I be remembered? Assume that life is a performance graded at the end. Mary Fields lived as though life were a task entrusted to you, not evaluated by others. You complete it. You return it. That framing removes panic from the equation. It also removes spectacle. By the time Mary reached old age, there was no internal reckoning left to perform. She did not look back with the intention of correcting herself. She did not rewrite her narrative to soften edges. She remembered accurately. Accuracy, in the end, is a form of peace. Many lives fracture late because people try to reconcile who they were with who they wish they had been. Mary Fields had no such fracture. The woman who walked through blizzards and the woman who sat quietly by the stove were not opposites. They were phases of the same integrity. That continuity is rare, and it is what makes her story difficult to dramatize at the end. There is no final confrontation, no last-minute revelation, no emotional summation delivered at the edge of death. There is only coherence. A life lived in agreement with itself does not need explanation. It needs acknowledgement as the narrative approaches its final turn. Mary Fields' story offers one last discomfort. It denies the reader a grand emotional payoff. It refuses to turn endurance into tragedy or triumph. Instead, it leaves us with a quieter reckoning. If a life can be complete without applause, if meaning can exist without recognition, if rest can be taken without regret, then what have we been waiting for? Mary Fields does not accuse. She reveals. She reveals that many of our questions are not philosophical, but postponements, ways of delaying commitment under the guise of reflection, ways of staying open because choosing would close something. Mary chose, again and again, not perfectly, not heroically, but consistently, and consistency, sustained over time, outlives brilliance. As this chapter ends, the story does not rush toward its conclusion. It slows deliberately, asking the reader to sit with something unresolved, not in Mary's life, but in their own expectations. The final chapter will not offer answers. It will offer a stance, a way of standing in the world that does not require constant justification. Mary Fields stood that way, and in the end, she did not need to explain herself. She had already finished the work. Some lives end with words. Mary Fields did not. There was no final statement meant to be remembered, no carefully chosen sentence spoken for effect, no attempt to shape how she would be understood once she was gone. Her life did not point toward a closing argument. It simply arrived at stillness. This is difficult for storytelling. Stories are trained to end loudly, to reward the listener with emotion, clarity, or moral resolution. But Mary Fields had never lived in that register. To give her a dramatic ending would be dishonest. She had spent a lifetime avoiding performance, so the ending must do the same. By the time her body failed completely, there was very little left unfinished. Not because she had planned it that way, but because she had never accumulated debt to herself. She did not postpone difficult choices. She did not defer responsibility to a future version of herself. She lived in sequence. What came next was handled when it arrived. That habit left little residue. When people later tried to identify her final days, they found nothing remarkable to report. No sudden change in personality, no reconciliation scenes, no confessions. She remained what she had always been, attentive, contained, unapologetic. If she felt fear, she did not display it. Not because she was fearless, but because fear no longer needed expression. It had done its work earlier in life. It had sharpened her. It had taught her when to move and when to stand. Now it was quiet. Mary Fields did not die as a symbol. She died as a woman who had completed her obligations. That distinction matters. A symbol demands interpretation. A completed life demands respect. The town did not eulogize her with exaggeration. People spoke plainly. They said what she had done. They said how she had lived. They did not try to make her agreeable or soften her edges for comfort. She was steady, someone said. She didn't waste time, said another. She showed up, said a third. No one needed to add more. Her absence did not feel like loss in the usual sense. It felt like the removal of a constant, something so integrated into daily life that its disappearance revealed how much had been resting on it. This is how essential labor ends, quietly. There was no sense that something had been cut short, no collective ache of if only. Her life had not promised more than it delivered. She had given what she had, and then she had stopped, in the days after. People noticed small disruptions. Tasks went unfinished longer than usual. Conversations hesitated. Decisions took more time. It was not grief. It was recalibration. They were learning how much of their steadiness had been borrowed from someone who never announced herself as a source. That, more than any monument, defined her role. Mary Fields had not anchored the town with authority or charisma. She had anchored it with reliability, with presence that did not fluctuate with mood or recognition. That kind of presence is invisible until it's gone. Stories often end by telling us what remains. Mary's ending does the opposite. It shows us what had already been there, quietly, persistently, long before anyone thought to name it. She did not leave instructions. She did not need to. She had already taught the lesson in the only way she believed in, by doing the work. After a story ends, the world does not pause. That is the first truth people forget. Cascade did not stop when Mary Fields was gone. The mail still arrived. The road still bent through the valley. Winter still came without asking permission. Children still grew, argued, left, returned. Life continued. But it did not continue unchanged. The difference was not dramatic. There were no visible cracks in the town, no sudden unraveling. The difference lived in timing, in hesitation, in the way people now double-checked their own resolve before speaking. Someone finished a job they would have left half done before. Someone waited out bad weather instead of forcing their way through. Someone chose silence where they once would have argued. These were not memorials. They were echoes. Mary Fields had never told people how to behave. She had simply behaved consistently enough that others adjusted themselves around her after she was gone. That adjustment remained. This is how influence survives without instruction. The story of Mary Fields, when told honestly, leaves behind fewer images than habits. There is no single scene that captures her essence, no frozen moment that defines her character. Instead, there are patterns of showing up, patterns of finishing, patterns of refusing to dramatize difficulty. Those patterns continued long after her name faded from daily conversation. People sometimes misunderstand what it means for a life to matter. They imagine impact as disruption, something that breaks, transforms, announces itself loudly enough to be recognized immediately. Mary Fields did the opposite. She stabilized, and stabilization is harder to notice than change, but it lasts longer. Years later, when new residents arrived in Cascade and asked about the tall black woman whose name appeared occasionally in old records, the answers they received were modest. She worked. She stayed. She didn't complain much. To outsiders, this sounded underwhelming. To those who knew, it was everything, because work done without complaint carries a specific gravity. It teaches people that endurance is not something you perform, it is something you practice. Mary Fields practiced endurance until it no longer needed to announce itself. The absence of drama in her ending is not a flaw in the story. It is the story, because a life spent resolving conflict as it arises does not accumulate a dramatic final reckoning. It leaves behind competence rather than catharsis, and competence is transferable. Mary did not leave behind doctrine. She left behind example. And example does not expire. It does not need defending. It simply waits to be recognized by those ready to see it. Long after the last retelling fades, long after her name becomes trivia again, the shape of her life remains relevant in quiet ways. In how people treat obligation, in how they relate to time, in how they understand the difference between motion and progress. Mary Fields did not live to be remembered. She lived to be finished. That distinction allows her story to end without apology. Nothing was cut short. Nothing was unresolved. Nothing needed redemption. The world did not owe her a monument. She had already placed something sturdier inside it, a standard, and standards do not erode easily. They settle into behavior, into expectation, into what feels normal over time. This is why her story feels oddly unfinished to some readers. They search for resolution and find none. They want meaning wrapped neatly and discover instead that meaning has been distributed quietly, across years and people and choices. Mary Fields does not conclude. She disperses, and that dispersal, slow, untraceable, persistent, is the final shape of her life. The story no longer belongs to her. It belongs to whoever is willing to carry work forward without asking whether it will be noticed. Every book must close, but not every life agrees to end. Mary Fields' story finishes here only because pages run out, not because its motion does. The road she walked did not disappear when she stopped walking it. It loosened itself from geography and settled into something harder to locate. Behavior, expectation, standard. These are not things you can frame. They do not belong to museums or plaques. They survive only if carried forward, unnoticed, by people who never asked where they came from. That was always Mary Fields' way. She never introduced herself as an answer. She showed up as a condition. If she was present, things got done. If she was gone, people learned how much had been resting on that presence. That is not myth. That is gravity. The mistake we often make at endings is to look backward too intently. We search for meaning in hindsight, as if a life's value becomes clearer only when it stops moving. Mary Fields' life refuses that framing. Her meaning was never retrospective. It was operational. While she lived, she made things work. After she died, the work continued, not because she had inspired it, but because she had normalized it. That normalization is the most durable form of influence there is, because it does not depend on belief. It depends on habit. People accustomed to consistency do not panic when things become difficult. They do not look for heroes. They look for what needs doing next. Mary Fields trained that reflex without instruction. She never said, "Be strong." She never said, "Endure." She never said, "Remember me." She acted. And action, repeated long enough, becomes culture. The final image many imagine for her is dramatic. A lone woman on a snowy road. Mail slung over her shoulder, vanishing into white. It is a compelling picture. It is also incomplete. The truer image is quieter. A woman sitting still, a town moving around her, work continuing without announcement, no struggle, no triumph, no audience, just sufficiency. The road Mary Fields walked was never about arrival. It was about passage, making sure something essential reached its destination despite weather, fear, neglect, or indifference. In the end, she herself became that thing, something essential that passed through the world, did its work, and moved on without ceremony. The book closes here, but the question it leaves behind does not ask to be answered. It asks to be lived. What would it look like to finish what you start? What would it feel like to stop without regret? What would remain if you were gone tomorrow? Not as memory, but as expectation. Mary Fields does not offer reassurance. She offers orientation. She points, not with words, but with posture, toward a way of living that does not wait for meaning to appear at the end. Meaning, in her life, was not discovered. It was practiced, daily, quietly, without witnesses. That practice does not belong to history. It belongs to whoever recognizes it and chooses to continue. And so the story ends where it began, not with a road stretching outward, but with someone standing still, having finished their work, unafraid of silence, and no longer needing to move. The book closes, the road does not.